Well, this is today's devotional for Wednesday, August the 3rd. The title of the devotional is, Who Are You Following? And our scripture reading is one chapter, Matthew chapter 8. Now, you're going to notice, if you're following this chronologically, we've actually passed over Matthew 5, 6, and 7. The reason for that is there are many scholars who feel like it is a parenthesis between events. And so chronologically, we're picking up our study at the end of Matthew chapter 5 and then coming to Matthew chapter 8 when the Lord comes down out of the mount where he had taught the Beatitudes in the famous Sermon on the Mount. And we will study that in another day or so. But for today, let's look at Matthew chapter 8. The Lord is coming down out of the mount where he has taught the Sermon on the Mount. And as he does so, you're going to see in Matthew chapter 8, there are several miracles that we find recorded here. Now, all of these attest to Jesus' divine power and authority over nature. For instance, verses 1 through 4, we have the healing of a leper. Now, coming down from the mount, Jesus met a leper who came and worshipped him in verse 2, saying, Lord, if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. Now, leprosy was a dreaded, incurable skin disease of that time. And by the way, it is in existence today. However, there are now antibiotics that help with the affliction of that disease. Now, nevertheless, it was an awful disease, and it eventually ate away at the flesh and the appendages of its victim. Now, the leper in our story would have been a miserable, desperate soul, an outcast, alienated from his family and society. Now, he came to Jesus seeking compassion and believing that he could be healed. Jesus passed social norms, touched the leper, and he said, I will be thou clean, verse 3. Now, we read immediately his leprosy was cleansed. Jesus then commanded the leper, see, thou tell no man, go thy way, show thyself to the priest, offer the gift that Moses commanded for a testimony unto them. And so the Lord sends him away and commands that he obey the law, present himself to be declared clean, and then offer a gift of sacrifice. Now that brings us to verses 5 through 13. The second miracle illustration here is one of healing the centurion's slave. Now notice as we continue now verse 5. The leper had departed. Jesus came to Capernaum, which was his headquarters in the Galilean area of his ministry, and there he was met by a centurion. Now a centurion was a Roman officer who commanded 100 soldiers. Now, this centurion, though a battle-hardened soldier, the centurion was a man who had compassion on a servant whom he described as, in verse 6, sick of the palsy, grievously tormented. Now, again, the Lord reaches past and he defies the norms, the prejudice of the Jews, and he consented to the centurion and said, I will come and heal him. That is your servant, in verse 7. Well, it was with humility now on the centurion's part that he answered the Lord, and he said, I am not worthy that thou shouldest come under my roof, but speak the word only, my servant shall be healed. Well, such humility is rare, especially among the rich and the powerful, but even more so was the centurion's faith, which was extraordinary. In fact, in verse 10, the Lord was astonished at the centurion's faith, and he commended his faith as superior to any he had found among the Jews. Well, the Lord then turned to his disciples, and there he foretold the gospel would be received by many Gentiles from the east and the west, and he foretold that the centurion was one of many Gentiles who would become citizens of heaven, in verse 11. And tragically, he goes on in verse 12, and he also says that there would be many of the Jews he describes as children of the kingdom who would reject him and be sentenced to outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth, a description of hell. And the scene with the centurion concluded then with Jesus assuring him his servant was healed. Now, as you continue, you'll notice in Matthew chapter 8, verses 14 through 17, the chronicles of healing that we've already considered in Mark chapter 1 and in Luke chapter 4. And so I'm going to press on with this devotional, looking at verse 19 through 22, for here we have what I'm describing as the first claim principle. Now, there were great crowds pressing upon Jesus, and he gave commandment to the disciples to depart, and let's go to the other side. Go to the east shore of the Sea of Galilee. Well, as they boarded their boats, there were two men that are recorded in Matthew chapter 8 who came to Jesus proposing that they would go with him. One was a scribe, and he says, Master, I will follow thee whithersoever thou goest. Well, the Lord answered that man that his life and his ministry would be one of poverty, describing his own earthly life as the Son of Man, Jesus, had thought where to lay his head. Well, the man hearing that turned, he walked away. Now, Matthew records that there was a second man that came, and we find he comes also with the Lord's invitation. And we read, Lord, he says to the man invited to follow the Lord, suffer me first to go and bury my father. Now, in essence, his father wasn't dead, but he was saying, allow me, Lord, to stay long enough that my father will give me my inheritance. Verse 21, and I will follow you. Well, Jesus in verse 22 refused that man as well, saying, follow me and let the dead bury their dead. Not a callous expression, but an honest evaluation of the man's priorities. Now, in the Gospel of Luke, Luke writes that there was a third man on this occasion who also proposed to follow Jesus, but like the others, he was not ready to depart. And so we have the first claim principle. The Lord, as a believer, has first claim on our life, and he will not accept second place. Well, that brings us to another miracle, and we find that in verses 23 through 27. It's well known. It's the disciples of the Lord being caught up in a storm, not even realizing that the very person of peace was in the boat with them. Now, Jesus and his disciples then in verse 24 set sail to go across the sea, but they found themselves suddenly in a great storm. And yet we read in verse 25, the Lord was fast asleep, and the disciples came to him, and they said, Lord, save us, we perish. Jesus then asked the disciples, why are ye fearful, O ye of the little faith? In verse 26. The Lord then rises to his feet, and we read in verse 26 that he rebuked the winds of the sea, and there was a great calm. Well, the disciples were stunned by the sudden quiet, and they said among themselves, what manner of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? Now, I have a closing thought for you as we look at verses 28 through 34, and it is this. We have seen the Lord have power to heal lepers, to restore a paralytic, and demonstrate authority over nature to calm a storm. And yet the Lord recognized the free will of men to choose to follow him or reject him. We have seen where there were three that rejected the Lord because they were unwilling to sacrifice selfish ambition and plans. Now, in verse 28 through 34, our study ends, reminding us the Lord has power over, and authority, by the way, over demons. For Jesus freed the souls of two wicked sinners from the devils that possessed them. And yet not even a herd of swine could abide the evil spirits that the men had allowed and they had tolerated. Tragically, when the neighbors heard how Jesus had cast the devils out of the men, they rejected him. And they besought him that he would depart out of their coast. Such is the callousness of the heart of man. Now, this devotional will be followed by another one, and I thank you for joining me on this day. God bless.